This morning, flags are flying half-staff for General Colin Powell. The former Secretary of State and Chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff died yesterday. He was 84. In a tribute, President Biden said Powell believed in the promise of America because he lived it. CBS News chief political analyst John Dickerson looks at Powell's path to success and one moment that he admitted to falling short.
As a teen, Colin Powell took what we would now call a selfie. His poise suggests a successful future was inevitable. Four-star general, national security advisor, and the first African-American chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and the first black Secretary of State. But Powell would insist success was not inevitable. It depended on a country that would welcome his immigrant parents and a city that would offer free college to a middling student. Aimless, he fell in love with another American avenue of opportunity, the military.
The Army took in a young black kid from ROTC in the South Bronx and brought him to this point.
Powell's rise in the military was not hastened by West Point or the Naval Academy.
I stand here today as a direct descendant of those Buffalo soldiers and of the Tuskegee Airmen and all the black men and women who have served the nation in uniform. I didn't just show up. I climbed on the backs of those who never had the kind of opportunity that I had.
Powell served in Vietnam, South Korea, and Germany, and he served in uniform in the Reagan, Bush, and Clinton administrations. In 2000, he declared a political party.
My fellow Republicans, it's a wonderful evening here tonight.
He joined George W. Bush's administration, and a career defined by fighting the Russians during the Cold War would end being defined by the war on terrorism, and his turn on the global stage at the United Nations.
A blot, a failure, will always be attached to me in my UN presentation.
During the successful first Gulf War, Powell had built credibility.
Our strategy to go after this army is very, very simple. First, we're going to cut it off, and then we're going to kill it.
He put that credibility on the line, making the case that Iraq's leader had weapons of mass destruction. But he was wrong. Iraq had no massive cache of weapons. The intelligence on which Powell had relied fell apart. A career spent arguing that the lessons of America's failure in Vietnam demanded care and restraint became forever linked to a costly, hasty mistake. In private life, Powell continued to sound the alarm. In 2008, he spoke out against his party's overt appeal to racism in its attacks on Barack Obama.
I have heard senior members of my own party drop this suggestion. He's a Muslim and he might be associated with terrorists. This is not the way we should be doing it in America.
But Powell's faith in America never waned because he was always ready to see its promise in the daily acts of its citizens. In 2019, while fixing a flat tire, a fellow veteran, an amputee, stopped to help him. Powell wrote to the Good Samaritan on Facebook, "Thanks, Anthony, you touched my soul and reminded me about what this country is all about and why it's so great." In return, all Anthony asked for as payment for his good deed was what an immigrant's son could never know would become a prize: a selfie with Colin Powell.
John Dickerson is with us right now. John, good morning.
Good morning, Nate.
Some would describe his legacy as complex. I would say highly decorated, highly respected. How will he be remembered?
Both can be true, and it's important. Colin Powell would say you have to remember both. When you read his books and you look at his lessons, one of the big ones is learn from your mistakes. But the arc of his life is the American story, somebody who was given these opportunities and who sees them. And by the way, he was given these opportunities not because he was a superstar. He was not a good athlete. He was not a good student. But the American system had a place for him, and then he could take advantage of it. And so it is both the American story and how to rise in that, and then also the complexities of Iraq.
Let's talk about Colin Powell, the man. Just the way you ended that piece, John, just sort of, I was so filled last night looking at all the accolades about him from both sides of the aisle, and people were talking about the type of man that he was and his style of leadership. But let's talk about Colin Powell, the man. What can you tell us about him?
Well, there are a lot of ways to lead. One is you give great speeches. One is you go and do great things. The other is what you do day to day when you interact with other people. And he was, he was this, he had a laugh that was concussive. It filled up a room like an explosion, a quick laugh, and was good to people, the little people. There are lots of people telling stories about being around Colin Powell and being nervous. but him treating them like they were, the most important person in the room. That model, Secretary Condoleezza Rice writes about it, that model as a person is also a kind of leadership. And it was decent, it meant kindness, and it meant integrity when challenged.
The appreciations rolled in from every living president, save for one. That would be Donald Trump. And it makes me wonder whether the direction of our politics means we're moving away from a Colin Powell style of leadership. Does it still exist?
It exists in boardrooms. It exists in some politicians in Washington. It exists anywhere people have to lead other human beings, because his lessons for leadership are the ones that people keep coming back to. And it obviously exists in the sports world. There is a very popular person in the Republican Party who chooses to lead in a very different way. But that is almost, it almost proves the point about the Powell School of Leadership. And one thing we have to wrestle with, and with his legacy, and again, he would have been very clear on this, is his argument for the invasion of Iraq was based on what they thought was true at the time. Different than what we talk about with lies now.
Yes.
But it's really important to go back and study how you can get it wrong and have consequences that are that great.
And you also own that, too.
Own it, yeah.
That's
Also
right.
Self-accountability.
own that, too.
And own it, but the crucial thing is not own it to move on and get to the next thing,
Yes.
but own it and understand it,
Yes.
and why that mistake was made, because he was obsessed with Vietnam and not repeating the mistakes of Vietnam,
Right.
and yet that's partially what people say happened with Iraq.
John
It's a big
Dickerson,
loss.
thank you very much. Glad to see you here at the table.
Yes.
Great to be here.
Yes.